Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, addicts of all ages, welcome to Canadian Sober, eh? I'm your host and resident alcoholic, Dougie Fresh. So glad you could join us tonight. When you go to Zoom meetings, as often as I do, and I go to a lot of recovery Zoom meetings, you get to meet characters around the whole world and people that, you just bond. You just find a little bit of friendship. They share. You really relate to them. And it's just that special little feeling that you have, that you're excited when you go to that meeting, that you see those people all the time, and this lady is one of those people. So I'm so pleased. Can we give a nice Canadian Sobre welcome to Laurie? How's it going today, Laurie?
It's going great. Thanks.
Awesome. So glad you could do this today. Could you tell the listening audience, the people at home eating their popcorn and drinking their Perrier, could you tell those people a little bit about who Laurie is?
Sure. Well, my name's Laurie. I'm out here in Seattle, Washington. I'm happy to let you know. I've been out here for a while. I came here. I'd already gotten clean and sober. I got clean in 1985, February 22nd. So my anniversary is coming up. I'll have 41 years. Incredibly hard to believe. I was 21 years old when I got clean. And the way I usually like to sort of talk about it nowadays is I like to go backwards. So instead of saying my experience, what it was like, what happened, and it's like now, I like to say what it's like now, what happened, and what it used to be like. And the reason I do that is because I got into the habit of telling my story, and I had, canned jokes and different things. And they were good, don't get me wrong, but it gets boring for people who have heard it before, right? Including me. So what I will tell you is I moved to Seattle in 2008, and I wasn't going to meetings at that time. I'd been in the program, like I said, since 1985. I left where I got clean and sober, small town, upstate New York, and I moved to Colorado. And I'd been in recovery about 15 years at that point, and I hadn't been really doing a lot of service. I don't remember a heck of a lot about it because it's been so long now and my memory's pretty shot. But what I do know is I had a sponsor. I did work the steps, but I didn't understand the program in the way that I do now, because what happened was when I got out here, I wasn't going to meetings. I was working what I called the program according to Laurie, which, as you might imagine, was not great. And what that meant was I did a really good, I owned my side of the street. So if I messed up and somebody said something about it, or I really knew that I was more than happy to apologize and to own it. But my life was pretty crazy. And in my way of looking at it, I wasn't all that sober. I was clean. I hadn't had a drink or a drug for over, 12 years, but I hadn't been going to meetings, and I had donated my big book to the Salvation Army. So that's where I was when I got out here. A couple years in, I was at work, and somebody was talking about their higher power. And so I instant messaged them and I said, "Hey, are you a friend of Bill's?" And she said, yeah, I am. And you should come to this meeting on Saturday. So I started slowly but surely going back to meetings. And I just cried. I cried in those meetings because I felt like I was home, and I was sorry I had missed being there for a long time. What it's like now, I can truly say that my life is still as unmanageable as it ever was. I have a lot of stuff going on right now that usually happens to people when their family gets older, and people get sick and get married. There's good stuff and there's bad stuff. I got laid off about 8 months ago, just got another job, but all this stuff seems to happen at one time, as you know. But instead of like when I was using, where that stuff would just build up and build up, and I got a bad back and neck actually because I just kept not dealing with it and put it to the side. Today I have a program and a toolbox, a toolkit of things that I can do in order to deal with my problems today. Doesn't mean I don't have bad days, but the way I look at it is, and what I've been taught is, every day I wake up with untreated alcoholism. And so it's my job to utilize the program in the best way possible in order to stay sane and to stay clean. I, at this point in my sobriety, and about a year in, I stopped craving it, both the alcohol and the drugs, because I am majorly dually addicted and also have mental health issues. And surprisingly enough, I actually have a really bad liver, but it wasn't from the drinking. So regardless, so I wake up, I have not quit drinking. Every day I choose not to drink on that day. And that's the only way I've been able to stay sober, because I, in the beginning, very much felt like you can't tell me what to do. It's a suggestive program. And I took it that way. If someone had told me I would never be able to drink again, I would have told them to screw off, because I didn't want anything to do with that. And I still don't. I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. So what I do is I take to heart many of the things that they talk about in AA. You know, I practice these principles in all my affairs. I practice tolerance. I try very hard to hear the message and not get distracted by who is saying it. So I've had a good number of years clean and sober, working in the program. I got very much into service. I became a sponsor almost right away when I moved here. I have a sponsor, I have sponsees. I answer phones at the local intergroup. I work on, I have a group of people that gets together and we read AA literature. And a matter of fact, that's one of the ways I learned about the history of AA, which then completely chilled me out about the program. I was always so concerned because it was so Christian, and that's not my background whatsoever. It also always upset me that the big book was so patriarchal. Everything was he and him. And I totally didn't understand that because of when it was written, it really spoke to, well, I mean, it was the program for a bunch of white guys, right? I mean, that's how it started, but that's not how it is, because it does practice. I mean, we are taught, and I will say for myself, because I can only speak for myself. I am taught that all I can do is speak for myself. I can't speak for other people. So my experience was that regardless of what is said in the book, people accepted me for who I was. And I find that today, and I make sure that I'm the person who goes up to the people in the room who seem to be standing by themselves, because I wanted that when I was around, when I first came around. So that's all to say that, I'm married. I don't have any children. I have a dog. I own my home. I have a job now again. Just a typical, what I would call, person of my day and age. But when I was young, I started using when I was very young. And what I like to say is that alcohol and drugs are what kept me alive. I think that I always needed something in between me and the rest of the world. And alcohol and drugs did that quite well. And I continued to do that until I was, 21 years old. Well, actually, it was probably when I was around in my 20s where it stopped working for me. I had always had this alchemy of sort of controlled drinking. So I knew how much I could drink to get a buzz, knew how much I could drink to get really drunk, and then be sober by the time it was time to go home. And I would drive everybody home. I'd be the designated driver, which is a little frightening. However, as time went on, it stopped working for me. And I was pretty, spiritually down in the dumps. I didn't have any spirituality. I had no concept or even wanting to have any kind of a concept of something bigger than me. And I was physically in really bad shape. And I didn't know what would happen when I drank. Sometimes I would get really wasted on like 2 beers, and sometimes I could drink and drink and drink and I wouldn't get drunk. So I ended up missing work, and I was in college then, and I missed my job. I was working full time and I was going to class full time, but I didn't really care about college. I cared about work, and I missed going in on a shift, and that was just not okay for me. My employer at the time said, "Hey, have you ever thought you might have a problem with alcohol and drugs?" And, I never had. I wanted people to think that I was an alcoholic so they feel bad for me, but I really didn't think I had. I had it all under control, right? So one thing led to the other. I figured that I would go to the library because that's when I was raised. It was like, if you want to know something, you go to the library. So I went to the library and I, went to the card catalog, which most people don't even know what that is anymore. And I think it was in the 600s, right? So I went up there and I pulled out this book. And today I think it was probably the big book, but I don't know if it was. And I remember I had opened it up and it said, if you can, quit drinking for 90 days. And I just shut the book because I was like, why would you want to? Why would you want to quit drinking for 90 days? Anyway, I ended up going to a meeting. People told me ahead of time what that was going to be like, that there was going to be a bunch of older people. I was 21, right? Older people there who were going to want to hug me and hold my hand and get my phone number, but they weren't making passes at me. And but I didn't have to do any of the stuff that they wanted me to. And they might say the Lord's Prayer, but not to be worried. It wasn't about God and, whatever. And that all worked out. I found people who were like me and who had struggled in the things that I had struggled with. I have to tell you that the fellowship at this point is my higher power. I really feel like the hope that I get from going to meetings and reaching out and working with other people in the program, that's what keeps me going. If I didn't have that fellowship and therefore the program, I couldn't do this by myself. That's a big part of it. I had tried to stop drinking before just because I thought I might, it might help me. And I couldn't. And I couldn't do it because I couldn't do it by myself. So if anybody, has had that experience where they just feel like their life is over, alcohol and drugs isn't doing it for you anymore, my experience has been that I went into meetings, nobody judged me. I was very worried about people having judgments about me. Nobody judged me. They accepted me the way I was. I've become a better person. I used to think I wasn't prejudicial against anybody except for people who were prejudicial, because I thought that was okay. But what I found out today is that's not even okay. I accept myself and I accept other people for who they are, regardless. So long as they're not hurting anybody, I could care less. And I stay sober one day at a time. That's really the story of my life. I think I'll just keep doing that a day at a time. And I'm assuming I'll have similar results. I don't know what else to tell you, Doug.
No, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. Um, I think the thing I like about your story is that you recover out loud a certain way. You're not ashamed to say like, hey, this is me. This is what I do. I find a lot of people here in Canada, haven't quite got there yet. And that's okay. That's totally cool. But it's starting to catch on a little bit, that our voice, and our recovery can be a guiding light for people more than say, it was, 30, 40, 50 years ago,
Sure.
and things are changing in our society that are causing people to maybe think differently and act differently when it comes to recovering out loud. I can tell you here in Canada that I can't go to a corner store today. I can't go to watch a movie like at the theater without like there being alcohol. I can't play a sport today without alcohol being involved in one way or another. It's just everywhere. I can't, I can't fill up gas today, without like going in and saying like, hey, here's the money for the gas, and then having booze sitting right there, just for me to take. So I'd like you to, if you don't mind, I'd like you to describe to the newcomer, to the person, sitting at home or who may be watching this, with all of the years of recovery that you have, explain to them that just because you're sober that long, or for how long you've been sober for, that you don't struggle, you struggle just the same as everybody else, and you can still have those days. Explain a little bit about that.
You bet. What I would say is this. Some of it has to do with growing up. There's that whole piece around that people talk about, that once you pick up a drink, you quit maturing. And so what that meant to me was when I got clean and sober at 21, I was really like 9. So you can imagine what that looked like and what my mannerisms were like and how I treated people. So they were expecting this adult and I was this little kid. And so there was this mismatch, right? What I know today is that over time, it's a disease. I'm not in charge of that. I have that disease. It's a hard one because you can't, it's around all the time. And a lot of people don't see it that way. But when I surrounded myself with people who felt similarly to me and who taught me how to live, it made it much easier. These people who are in meetings, they know the same struggle. Doug and I, what do we have in common? I mean, probably a whole heck of a lot. He's in Canada, I'm here in the States. We could go on and on. But when it comes to meetings and our sobriety and our disease, we might work the program differently, but the disease and the experiences are very similar. So for folks who are just starting to even think about getting clean and sober, I would say, go to a meeting, talk to people. People will come up to you if you're lucky, and if they don't, go to another meeting. The people that you need to talk to and that are going to help you to get clean and sober, or answer your questions or anything, are going to be at one of those meetings. It is around all over the place. Today, I don't really even see it all that much. And I have to say that some of that is time, but also I know today that the answer isn't there. That's not my answer. If I have people around me today that I can go to, not like the people I used to use with, but people around me today who, if I know I could text Doug and, outside of a meeting and just be like, dude, this is this messed up stuff that happened to me and I don't know what to do and it's driving me crazy or whatever. And I know that he would get back to me and that he would say something, like I have close people in the program too. But it's a fellowship that's all over the world. And so I feel like I'm surrounded by support every single day. And in a way that isn't even like a chosen family. It's like family that I don't even know are there sometimes,
Yeah. Yeah, I used to go when I first started getting sober around here in Collingwood. There was a gentleman who's no longer with us. His name is Darby, and Darby was, I don't know the exact age of Darby. I know he was in his late 80s, I want to say. And he golfed every single day, and he passed away, I believe, with 46 or 47 years of continued sobriety. But he would say in meetings all the time, he would say, where can a guy go my age and relate to people who are, in their 20s, in their 30s? Where can a guy do that? And he goes, nowhere. He goes, yeah. I can't go on the golf course and relate to somebody like that age. But in here, in a meeting, I can relate, and I feel like I belong. And it's really weird to say, but like a lot of my good friendships I have in recovery are all with like guys that probably could be the age of my father, or the age of my grandfather or something like that. They're all guys with long-term sobriety. And it's simply because, I put those relationships in my life. I surround myself with people like that. The one thing I'd like to ask you is, and this might sound a bit of a weird question, but I know when I got sober, it exposed some other things in my life. Other addictions, maybe some other flaws. Maybe it ADHD came out. Things like that. Is there anything in your life when you got sober that started to come to the surface and you were like, oh, maybe there's an issue there?
Right. Well, what I'll tell you is two things. One thing that is a big part of my story that I didn't mention, and it feeds into what you were saying, was so it was 1985, and I was someone who had dated and had relationships with both men and women. And so I identified as a lesbian, and I was concerned because back in the 80s, people weren't as out about it as like today. I mean, I'm married now to a woman. I live in Seattle. It's pretty chill, but it wasn't anything like it is today. And so when I got going to meetings, I was really concerned because I was worried that people were going to judge me. And nobody ever said anything about it. If I brought it up, they would talk about it, right? And if I asked somebody about like what they did for a living, they would talk about it. But really, it was about how do we live our lives and not pick up, alcohol. And I have always felt full acceptance in this program. What I would say about other addictions and other things is when I was not going to meetings, but I hadn't picked up drugs and alcohol, because to me, a drug is a drug is a drug. So some folks don't feel like other drugs should be a part of the story. But for me, and again, it's just my program, that is a part of what my story is. I started eating. So I ate a lot. I've just recently lost a bunch of weight for health reasons, but I found, and that's a lot harder because you can't quit eating.
Right.
Like every day I have to, figure out what that's about. And so I went through many different trials and tribulations around that. Trying to figure out how to not be excessive about what I was eating, but also not be so obsessed with calories or try to figure out a way that I could drink so that I could manage it, right? Also, I have major depression disorder. And so I do take antidepressants. And, some folks in the program, they feel like you shouldn't take any drugs whatsoever, even if you're going to have surgery. My understanding with my sponsor is that if I'm prescribed something, I can take it. I had major surgery on my shoulder a couple years ago, and I gave those drugs to my wife, and she doled them out to me. And when it was time for me to go off them, I got off them. But other people don't feel that way, and that's their story. But so I feel like because this disease, it's called alcoholism, but there are, and I'm not a doctor or scientist or anything, but what I can tell you is I have an obsessive personality. I can get addicted to, the internet, television, porn, whatever it is, I can get addicted to it. If it sends me dopamine, I can get addicted to it. The only thing I've never gotten addicted to is exercise. And that's the only thing I wish I could, although, some people are, and it's not a pretty sight, right? I just wish that I could, get past the thing of once I get there, I'm good, right?
Yeah.
But regardless, so that's the answer to your question is, I just feel like I can get addicted to anything. If I'm on the beam and I'm living a good, to me, what I consider a good, sober life, then I'm balanced.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was like I had to learn how to live again, but I definitely relate to the food aspect of it. And now it made like, after a couple years of getting sober, it was like now all the gummies and the food and the cookies and stuff makes sense, right? Because we have that sugar addiction, right? Like you want sugar. I gained a lot of weight in being sober, and you see people come in and they get sober and they lose a lot of weight, and I was like, well, what's going on here?
Well, how come
right?
that didn't happen to me? Well, when I got clean, people would give us chocolate bars, right? Because they were like, it's a sugar thing. And I was also a smoker. I didn't know I was a smoker, but what had happened was, I smoked when I drank. Well, what I figured out when I stopped drinking was I still smoked, so I was a smoker, and they told me not to quit until I'd been sober for a while, and so I did smoke for quite a while into my being clean and sober, and then realized I just needed to get off of that as well. So
yeah, for sure. A question I'm interested in, and I've been asking this to a lot of guests lately, is you mentioned your wife. Does she drink?
Good question. So one of the ways, so we got together through the internet back when that was considered risque. Okay, because I'm old. But anyway, and one of the things we figured out right away when we met was that she has a background in Al-Anon. And so she had a beer in her fridge. When we got together, she had a beer in her fridge that had been in there for like 5 months. I mean, what the heck? So she wasn't a drinker, but she just stopped. She doesn't drink. Um, some of that is because we choose to have no alcohol or anything in our home.
Mhm.
But some of that is because she's just not interested. And she does work a program and she's very much involved in Al-Anon now. And so part of that program, I mean, from what I understand, some of that program is, abstaining from alcohol and drugs yourself. So um, it's not a thing for her. And of course, it's been great because um, her father's in the program. A lot of her family are in Al-Anon. My sister got clean and sober. That's part of the reason I came back into meetings. Was she decided she wanted to quit drinking, and she started talking to me about it. And then I realized, oh, I probably need to be going back to meetings if I'm telling her she needs to go. Um, so yeah, no, she doesn't use, we don't have any alcohol in the house.
Nice. Yeah, same here. My wife and I said that, if people were to come over, there's no booze entering that doorway
Yeah.
whatsoever. I remember having a poker game, sober poker game one night. My wife was away on a shopping trip and I invited a bunch of guys from the program to come over and play poker. And one of the guys, he wasn't exactly sober, just yet. And he brought, I think, a 6 pack of beer, and he got really offended when I told him that doesn't come into my house.
Yeah.
That stays outside, and he left. He didn't stay.
Yeah.
So I was
And
like,
different people have different rules around that
yeah,
for themselves. It's not because I feel like I'm going to use it.
yeah, no,
It's
yeah,
just,
for sure,
I don't personally, I mean, after a while, if I'm with people who are drinking, even if they have no problem with it, after a couple drinks, I don't really have much to say to them because
yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
interested in what they're saying.
yeah, for sure. 15 seconds left.
Sure.
Zoom or in person?
Oh gosh. You know, I really like in person. I set up a lot of meetings on Zoom. My home group Zoom. Probably 2 out of the 4 meetings I go to are on Zoom. Um, so I'd say it's a toss up. I like Zoom. I meet people from all over the world. Um, and I also like being able to get hugs and, just getting a sense of people in a different way. So I
Nice,
would say it's 50-50 for me.
nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Laurie. I had a blast. You did great. And hopefully maybe in the future we can have you back to do a little more, another little update.
Wonderful.
Um, awesome. Thanks for joining us tonight on Canadian Sober A. Thanks to our guest, Laurie. We'll see you guys all next week for another amazing guest. Bye bye for now. See ya.